Well, welcome to Talking Off-Road with Mike McGarity. This show is dedicated to the off-road enthusiasts who want to keep our off-road riding areas open, as well as to the business sponsors and the clubs who support the advocacy groups. These groups work on everyone's behalf, and I would argue that we are the true environmentalists. So I'm joined with Ben Burr. He's the executive director of the Blue Ribbon Coalition. Hi, Ben.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Great. Hey, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you start off with talking about how did you become the executive director for Blue Ribbon Coalition?
Yeah, thanks. I joined the Blue Ribbon Coalition as a staff member back in 2019. I started off as the policy director. And prior to that, I had been working in Congress. I worked in the US Senate for 7 years. And after that, I left and worked with a Forest Service supervisor who helped me understand how these federal land agencies worked, and we helped ranchers, we were helping miners, we were helping all kinds of public land users. And then that naturally led to eventually learning how these fights work with outdoor recreation. And the previous executive director of Blue Ribbon Coalition recruited me to be the policy director. I joined in that capacity, and then when he had to step down, I stepped in and filled in the role of executive director about 2 years ago.
The biggest fight going on right now, and everyone in California really needs to hear about it. Tell us what's happening in Moab.
Yeah, so in Moab, we had the Bureau of Land Management release a final plan for the Labyrinth Rims, Gemini Bridges, travel management area. But this is basically everything west of the highway as you're coming south into Moab from I-70 all the way to the Green River. So this is a 300,000 acres of some of the best riding areas in Moab. So if you've ever made that road trip and spent several days or a week or however long out exploring those backcountry trails, the big deep canyon overlooks, going into the bottoms of the deep canyons, all these amazing campsites we found out there, that whole area was reanalyzed by the BLM through what they call a travel planning process. And through that process, with a huge amount of pressure from the environmental groups and the current administration, they decided to close 317 miles. And some of these are some of the best off-road routes on the planet, is what I've been saying, because they really are world-class destination where people come from, certainly California, but as far away as Australia, Europe, Africa. I mean, people are coming from all over the world to wheel Moab. And this was a huge punch in the gut to the off-road community. And really, I think anyone who is interested in any form of outdoor recreation in this area, just about everyone got hurt by this plan, except for probably the river rafters.
So was this forced upon them by the federal government?
When people are like, how did this happen all of a sudden in Moab? I'm like, this has been happening for 20 years. That they've been fighting for this. And they finally got the right political alignment in Washington where they could get it done, and they pushed it through. And it'll keep going because we're going to challenge this plan in court. We know there are others looking at the same thing. We know the state of Utah is looking very hard at challenging this, because I think the BLM got it really wrong, but it was part of this legal settlement. They were required to do these plans again. And there's a whole bunch of other plans in Utah that they're also doing the same process with. And that's our other problem with this, is it sets a really terrible precedent that if any other user group doesn't, there were a lot of trails they closed here just because the folks who are out paddling a raft on the river said they didn't even want to see an off-road vehicle, that ruins their experience. And BLM actually agreed with that argument and closed routes because of that. And so that's just a terrible slippery slope. We don't know where that ends. And aside from that, there's a lot of other reasons we'll be fighting this in court.
I would imagine that you're completely correct. This does set a precedent. So what other areas are going to be next in their sites? And
well, in Utah, we know for sure that it'll be like the Santa Fe Swell, the Henry Mountains, 9 Mile Canyon, Dinosaur North, the Book Cliffs. I mean, there's areas around Kanab and the Coral Pink Sand Dunes. And there's another area out near Moab called the Dolores Canyon. So the legal settlement's dictating this. But aside from that, Blue Ribbon Coalition, since I've started running it, I hired a policy director, and we've been very aggressive in commenting and engaging on every federal plan we possibly can. We do about 300 of these a year at this point in all the states that have public land management actions that are in motion. And so the best thing you'll have to just follow Blue Ribbon Coalition either on social media, go sign up for our updates on our websites, become a member, and you'll see all the different things that are coming. But that's not a question I can just answer with a simple answer. There's plans in motion everywhere, especially with this administration.
Sure. So what actions can people take right now?
Yeah, so right now everyone wants to know what they can do to help in Moab, and they are rising to the challenge of what we're all going to have to do as a community to fight back for those trails. And so the first one will be a legal action. We're preparing that as we speak. I was on the phone and texting lawyers all day today. We've been laying the groundwork to get an appeal in place. Ideally, want to stay the decision, and so that it doesn't go into effect until all the legal questions are settled. The second thing we want is for people to contact their member of Congress. The settlement really, it does say that the BLM can only implement these plans if they have appropriated funds for Congress. And so I don't think any member of Congress has any business voting to give the BLM funding to implement these terrible plans, because they really are a radical wish list of the environmental groups that they want, that what they got in this plan, they have already proposed to do in a wilderness bill, but they can never get anybody to support or vote on that bill. So they're doing through a travel plan what they can't get done through legislation. And that's not how our government's supposed to work. And so Congress should hit the brakes on that. They should pull the funding and keep the previous management in place until all the legal cases get settled, and ideally until they can resolve this problem of agencies enacting a really aggressive and restrictive wilderness bill that Congress has never passed. That's what they're doing through these actions. And so Congress needs to intervene. The third thing is we want anybody who has a platform like you, this radio show, we want everybody getting the word out. If you're a social media influencer, if you have a following, if you have a platform of your own, we want you, on our website, we have an action plan you can take. You can find that in our profile on our social media accounts. You can find it on sharetrails.org. The other reason the wilderness groups won on this is because they lied. They lied about saying this place was getting ripped up by side-by-sides. And I see our own community saying that. I spent weeks out in this area inventorying the trails. I saw 5 side-by-sides in weeks after going. It's not where they are. They go to Hell's Revenge and other places in Moab that weren't impacted by this. And so the group that got hurt the most was the overlanders and the folks who want to go out dispersed camping out into the backcountry around Moab. That's who lost the most access without question. Like, it's not even debatable. That's who lost from this plan. The fourth thing is we want the industry to be involved. Everyone asks me all the time, well, who supports Blue Ribbon Coalition? Does this company, and it's a good question. The industry should be supporting us. It's these trails that keep them in business. Fifth thing is we've spent the last year, we had a grant from Yamaha Outdoor Access Initiative to do a second volume of our Lost Trails guidebook. And what we do with these guidebooks is we found in earlier lawsuits similar to this Moab one, that the reason we were losing trails and getting them closed wasn't because they were overused, wasn't because of environmental impact, wasn't because of garbage, it wasn't because of too many people. It was because they said we weren't using them enough and they were reclaiming back to nature. And so we got the field notes from the environmental groups. We looked at all the public comments from the BLM and found the routes they were saying that about. Then we went out and inventoried those routes. So these are the lesser known trails in this area in Moab. We also included an area called the Black Canyon Corridor in Arizona, which is another travel plan that we're appealing down there, where they had closed 60% of the routes. And so we have some information about a snowmobile area that we're watching closely in Colorado. And then we also included a bunch of dispersed campsites in the back with coordinates, just to give you a flavor of what other experiences are out there that are getting potentially restricted by these aggressive management plans. But we have these. If you go to losttrailsguidebook.com, you can order a copy of this. The money goes to support our fight. And then you get a cool guidebook with some hidden gem trails that most people haven't discovered. I went on most of these, me and one of our staff members, and every single one of them is an awesome experience. And we want people to go explore them. We want them to become, I call it an advocate explorer, that you go fall in love with your places, and so that you want to fight for them if these agencies take them away through some radical environmentalist plan to get you off the land, which is unfortunately a thing we're contending with pretty regularly right now.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into my next question is, everyone's been hearing about this 30 by 30. Where do you see this going and why?
Yeah, so we've been tracking this 30 by 30 agenda for a while now. And I know that those of you in California probably had a head start on this because your state government was really bought into it before the federal government really started talking about it. And so when Biden was elected, one of his first executive orders was that we're going to have this plan called the America the Beautiful plan. And it's the 30 by 30, which means they want to lock up 30% of our lands and waters by the year 2030. And this all originated from a marketing campaign from environmental groups, but there was never a law passed. There isn't some law that Congress has passed that said, we agree with the 30 by 30 agenda, and this is now the policy of the United States of America. That never happened. They will use the Antiquities Act to enact this agenda, and that's part of the reason we're challenging that in court. We have filed an appeal in the 10th Circuit, or we're basically preparing an appeal to go in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Our hope is that we get a challenge to the Antiquities Act to the Supreme Court. Probably a dozen wilderness bills out there, and wilderness is the most restrictive form of land use designation, period. Once they designated a wilderness, if you aren't really in good shape and athletic and ready to go backpack for days, you're not going to experience it. They don't allow motorized access, and they don't allow any sort of utilization of the resources. And so there are several wilderness bills. We have action alerts at Blue Ribbon Coalition for the public to go and oppose all of those on our website, sharedtrails.org. There's the Chumash Marine Sanctuary is one we've been opposing. And I've been talking to the press about that one, and that's where they're going to take a bunch of offshore land. I mean, the 30 by 30 agenda does say to lock up 30% of the lands and waters of the United States. This includes Pismo Beach and Oceano Dunes. And so if there's another restrictive designation in a federal agency coming in on top of like this National Marine Sanctuary, will be one more layer on top of that. So we're watching that closely.
Yeah, the crazy thing is that California won't count any of the land that's multi-use. So all the SVRAs, they won't count that as part of the 30%.
Yep, it's really loosey-goosey how, like, what counts for 30 by 30, because if you were to ask me, I would say Utah's at 70% protected right now because we're 70% federal land, and federal land has so many protections on it already. It doesn't have to be a national monument to basically be it doesn't have a lot happening on it, and they don't count that. There's parts of my yard where I haven't done a good job maintaining it that's pretty much managed as wilderness right now. Does that count? Just
Right.
because I've been lazy and so it's been taken over by the weeds and the bugs and the bees and everything else? It should, it doesn't. And so they don't really give you a good way of tracking the scoreboard on this. It's really left up to them to decide. And that's why you shouldn't make policy out of marketing campaigns. You should make policy based off of statutes and laws passed by a legislative body like a Congress. But that's not how this group operates. And so they'll do everything they can to enact it. That this travel plan in Moab, I say, is an expression of the 30 by 30 agenda. The travel plans in Arizona we're contesting are the 30 by 30 agenda. Resource management plan in Wyoming right now is going to take 3 million acres of Wyoming, one of the big energy producers in our country. It produces all kinds of energy: wind, coal, gas, oil, all of it. Their plan proposes taking all of that offline and making it very restricted. And so there's a revolt happening in southern Wyoming right now that if you're not watching all these things like we do at BRC, you might think, hey, this is affecting my backyard, and you get fired up. But you need to understand it really is a massively broad agenda that's impacting every acre of public land. And so and if you think you're okay just because you're a recreation user, you're not. You're most likely the target of what needs to be restricted. And if you think it's the other guy, if you think it's the side-by-side rider or the dirt biker or the e-biker, everyone has some other group that's the problem. That's the distraction. The problem is you, and you're the target, and you're the person they'll be restricting. And that's exactly what we saw happen in Moab. Is they went after everybody, and everyone thinks it was targeting everybody else, and it's like, but everybody got hammered by it. So maybe it's time to unite and fight back.
Yeah, and literally, if you're into any type of off-road recreation, if you want to drive off-road and access into these areas, you're gonna get restricted. And it doesn't matter what type of recreation you're going out there to do. It does. It affects everyone. It affects you and you and you and everybody. So that's a really good point. So how does the general public, how do they get involved? How do they support BRC? What does it cost to be a member?
Yeah, so you can find us at sharetrails.org is our website. We are also on all the major social media platforms as Blue Ribbon Coalition. We're active on all of them. We'd love to see you there. If you go to sharetrails.org, there will be a big button right on the homepage where you can join to become a member. And we have a handful of membership options. A basic membership's $25 a year, premium membership's $50. We do have a membership offer right now. If you go to losttrailsguidebook.com, you can get a guidebook and a premium membership for $75. And that's just for the individuals. We value members because that's who gives us our legal standing to challenge these things in court. If we didn't have any members, we would have a hard time going to court on behalf of anybody. We have to go to court on behalf of you, the members. And so we want everybody to join. We want them sharing their experiences with us. We want them using our action alert tools to contact the agencies, because that gives us visibility into how these plans are actually affecting you, the users, and our members. We also have a business membership. Our premium business memberships are $300. We have a lot of clubs and organizations. I love the off-road community because there is such a vibrant culture of volunteer organizations and clubs that like to get together and do volunteer projects and do stewardship projects. And then they do raffles and dinners and all kinds of things to raise money. And then they help support an organization like ours. And so if you're in a club, we'd love to have you support us along with all the other great causes that I know for a fact your clubs are also supporting, but add us into the mix. We do need the support of the clubs as much as anybody does. And then we get a lot of support from just the businesses donating. We had a lot of folks sponsor volume 2 of the guidebook, and that helped us print enough bulk copies that we got it for a really good price, and so that we can use those as the promotional tools that they are. So there's a lot of ways to support us, but it's all done through grassroots donations. We do, like the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance that we're always up against here in Utah, the Sierra Club. We know that they have these big, deep-pocketed donors that are never going to let them not succeed because they don't have the financial resources. We only succeed because we get the grassroots support from all the off-road community. And there's a trend out there going around, it's like called girl math or boy math, where people like come up with different kinds of doing math for whatever reason. And I say there's off-roading math, and you go out there and people will put 50, 60, 70 grand into a rig to build a really nice off-roading machine. And they don't blink an eye. It's like, of course that makes sense that we'd spend that much money on this rig and the tow rig and everything else that goes into it. And then you ask them for a $50 a year of membership, and all of a sudden the math starts adding, like, wow, that's a lot. We don't know. And I want people to just get over that. If everybody in our industry did that $50 a month, everyone who enjoys this power sport recreation, motorized recreation outdoors, we would probably be one of the most well-funded nonprofits in the country. We just need people to become a little bit committed to it, and then we'll go fight hard for you. We'll fight as hard as what we have the resources to do. And I think we're hitting above our weight at that right now. Yeah,
we get people come to our Corva booth and they've got a $15 beer in their hand, but they go, whoa, $40 a year to be a member. It's like, you can't even go have breakfast with your wife for $40. So I totally agree. They need to do the math, especially when you're looking at the amount of money and investment they have in their off-road rig. What are they going to do with that rig when they don't have trails to go ride on?
There's shows. I mean, you can go take them around to shows and show them off to people. There's always the mall parking lots. If you're an overlander, I think some Walmarts still allow you to camp in their parking lot overnight. So there's still places you can go.
There you go. Yeah.
It's not nearly the adventure and the experience of getting out onto our public lands that belong to us, the American people. There's a lot of great experiences to be had out there that I think are worth fighting for. I think that we get significant public health benefits. We don't talk enough about what those are as a community. And when they cut us off from these resources and these places, they really are causing injury to everybody who's gotten attached to those places and invested that experience into their identity. Now you're just cut off from a portion of who you are. And it's a really violent and wrong thing to do. I think our position is everybody should have access to the outdoors and have access to those experiences. We'll be a better, stronger country if everybody does. And so that's what we do. It's what we fight for. I know it's what you guys at Corva do a very great job at out there in California, and we're all in this together.
Well, I appreciate that. Everything you said today needs to strike a chord with everyone listening. Everyone needs to be involved. So, Ben, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you taking the time to talk, and hopefully everybody, gets involved and puts the action into their membership. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Mike.